Well, my favorite part about piano is that you get to learn about this wonderful device. When you play on the keys, it feels like it's magical, just like tapping, tapping.
One of the chief things that studying an instrument, and piano specifically, can do for students is really teach them to be forgiving of themselves when they make a mistake, to be patient with themselves, and to practice a skill unto mastery. And the feedback that you get once you've succeeded at making music and sharing it with somebody else through applause or through just the pleasure that you give someone really makes kids feel wonderful about themselves. It's great for your academics, and it's a wonderful set of study skills that they learn.
The relationships that they've formed with their teachers. I can't say enough about the quality instruction that occurs in the Gilmore Piano Lab and how my students thoroughly enjoy their experiences every week and how they look forward to coming to this lab.
Any student that signs up can be in the class, and it's really great because it happens during the school day. The teacher has the opportunity to help everyone do something that they want to do.
I feel like I'm better playing it now because when I first started last year, I had no experience. When I get older, I want to be a professional pianist. I want to learn as much as I can now and then kind of see where that takes me after that because I really want to make my dreams a reality.
The Gilmore Piano Lab is providing an opportunity for so many children who would otherwise not have this opportunity in their life.
Kalamazoo, a name known by the world, stamped in wood, steel, and song. Have you been? It's a place born by running river, babbling with a vibrant community, the sort of place that'll make you marvel. All of this in Kalamazoo. Get out and discover, with trails, water, and winding roads where you'll want to get lost. Explore visionary menus, craft cocktails, and unmatched local beer. Art and performance that'll lift you from your seat, and memories worth holding on to. All within a short and beautiful drive. Bring your family, your friends, your dreams along to a place that'll stick with you long after you've turned in. History, art, theater, craft food and beverage, trails, water, community. What else might you find here? Why don't you come on out and discover cool, comfortable Kalamazoo.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Shoemaker. I'm Director of Education with the Gilmore Piano Festival. Welcome to our last talk of our talk series. This talk is part of the Gilmore Festival Fellowship Program. It's a new residency program that aims to flip the traditional classical musical model on its head by providing financial support for our guest pianists, also 100% tuition coverage, and time to focus on the art, the business, and the person. We would like to thank our sponsor, our Art Mentor Foundation, Lucerne, for providing the support. And we would also like to thank our neighbors, the Black Arts and Cultural Center and Kalamazoo Public Library, for teaming up with us on these talks. The library is also providing our live stream for today, so we're really grateful to be partnering with them. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce our local poet, philosopher, author, and educator, Mark Nepo. He's a New York Times bestseller, and he's been called one of the finest spiritual guides of our time. Later this week, he'll be working with the Festival Fellows, exploring the nature of creativity and how we can develop our lifelong process of listening, reflecting, and expressing. Please welcome Mark Nepo.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Thank you for coming today, and thank you to Adam and Pierre and Anders, the whole Gilmore Festival, for inviting me to be part of this, to speak about the deeper process that informs all the art forms and the art of living. And so we're going to have about 2 hours here. This is kind of our living room. We'll take about a third. I'm going to share some things, and we'll have a third to be in conversation, and then I'll share another third on the other side. So feel free to, the restrooms are out there. You're not interrupting if you need to use them, because we're not going to. Also, if it's hard for you, get up, stretch, stand. We're just here having a conversation together. So I want to start with the things I've learned over the years, discovered, is that the creative process is very akin to the introspective process. They've really become the same thing. And so a lot of the things that I've learned from being a poet, being a philosopher, listening, exploring, discovering, have turned out to be very, very useful in just living a full, authentic life. And so, my focus today is, how does this creative, expressive journey shape us? More than what we create, we're created by this engagement. So whether you write music, or whether you write words that go into books, or whether it's painting, or whether it's gardening, or whether it's fixing a Porsche, or whether it's making dinner for loved ones, it's the engagement that keeps us close to life and brings us alive. So and I come to you, yes, as I'm 73. When I met someone my age when I was younger, I thought they were ancient. And it doesn't seem so old now. But, as a young man, and I was, very serious, of course, about I wanted to be a poet, whatever that meant. And I thought if I studied hard and long, and maybe I could write one or two great poems that would add to the literature. Well, then in my early 30s, I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And writing great poems didn't matter so much. I needed to discover true poems that would help me live. And now I want to be the poem. The words are just a trail. But I just happen to write it down. You don't even have to write it down. Because the poetry of life has already happened by the time the urge is to create an artifact of it. So let me enter all this. And so as we share today, whatever your art form is, formal or informal, I invite you to personalize whatever touches you. Like, where does this live in my life? How will this help me live? How will this help me be a little bit more authentic? How will it help me listen a little better and more openly? So I want to start with a quote and two poems. And the quote is from George Bernard Shaw, who said, "Use a mirror to see your face. You use art to see your soul." You use a mirror to see your face. You use art to see your soul. So the first poem I want to share of mine, one is about presence and one is about absence. So this is from, a lot of times folks ask where, so this is from The Way Under the Way, page 199. It's called Not According to Plan. When I drop my glasses in the airport and they're crushed in the walkway between terminals, I get to meet the three kind souls who help me on my way. Then I hear you crying after everyone has left, so I bring you water. Now I hear your story. Ever since the lock on my door broke, I have more visitors. Now the road I always take is detoured, which I curse until I see the heron glide across the small pond I didn't know was there. I think one of the real struggles in our age is that we've lost the ability to renew our direct connection with life. And all the traditions in different ways and offer different practices, and all the art forms help us restore our direct connection with life, which comes through presence. But also absence brings us right. You know, great love and great suffering have always been the great teachers. We'd like great love, but like gravity, nobody escapes gravity. We're all going to have the things that we need to encounter and help each other through. So this was several years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a period of loss, as we all have, that my wife Susan and I went through. Within about 18 months, we lost her mother and both of my parents and a beloved dog. And so it was a huge time of grief. And it was this time of year, and I was out on our deck, beautiful day. And all of a sudden, I fell into that chasm of grief, of loss. But the day was still beautiful all around me. And I was too exhausted to choose between them. And that led to this poem called Adrift. Everything is beautiful and I am so sad. This is how the heart makes a duet of wonder and grief. The light spraying through the lace of the fern is as delicate as the fibers of memory forming their web around the knot in my throat. The breeze makes the birds move from branch to branch as this ache makes me look for those I've lost in the next room, in the next song, in the laugh of the next stranger. In the very center, under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost face each other. It is there that I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I am so sad, and everything is beautiful. Now this also, so whether it's presence or absence, our being willing to have an open heart and an open mind and stay authentic allows us to keep drinking from what matters. And so the other thing, I wouldn't use that poem as an example about the introspective process, for that's available to everyone. So I didn't know where this was going. I didn't say, oh, that would be neat to end it if we go around like, no, I'm not that smart. But by following whatever the moment is true, even the ambiguity and the confusion, this is beautiful, this is sad, what is it? I don't know. By being true to it, I was rewarded with an insight, which is very much like the introspective process. So, you know, the lesson for me, which I didn't know before I entered this authentically, was under it all, what we have that no one can take away, and all that we've lost face each other. It's there I'm adrift, feeling punctured by a holiness that exists inside everything. I didn't know that when I started. And I retrieved it, it's been my teacher. So when we can be true to our experience, we are rewarded with an insight often that we then have to live with to learn what it means. This is both the artistic process and the human process in the art of living. In the art of living. So we never know how we'll be touched by life. So again, more than what we create, life creates us. And so to speak, I'll go back to my cancer journey. I was very young. I was just out of graduate school. I was teaching at Auburn University. I was really wanting to do this right, well, what best I could, and boom, everything was turned upside down. And so then I was forced to not say, what stories, poems, what things can I create? It was no, I needed to climb the rope of expression to get from day to day. Because I learned very early on that what is not expressed is depressed. What is not expressed is depressed. So it became not creative writing, but the expressive journey of healing. And like anything, I still had to learn my craft. But the worth wasn't in the technical proficiency. It was in what came through me from life. I think all authentic, when we're authentic, and I think all artists too, whatever the form, when we're authentic, we are conduits for life force. And so in addition to learning whatever skills and proficiency are in our particular form, how do we keep the conduit open and clear and clean? So that expression is a form of medicine itself. Some of you probably have heard that, the way that Michelangelo worked was very different than other sculptors. Most sculptors would circle their work and keep chipping away till whatever form they were trying to create was exposed. Michelangelo felt he saw the finished statue in the marble, and so he merely went from the front to the back, carving the excess away. Well, I want to offer to you, each of us is that statue in the uncut stone, and experience carves away the excess in us until we become individuated and whole and accessible to all life around us. So I want to talk about, in this first part, the nature of expression, what I feel or have experienced, the primary functions of art, and about our foundational story. One way to understand why is it that what's not expressed is depressed. Well, imagine how we're breathing. So we just can't say, well, for these next 2 hours, we'll just inhale. No. So, we have to inhale and exhale. How you do it, how fast, how slow, that's your personal rhythm. But we have to inhale and exhale. Well, the heart's no different. And the way the heart inhales is by perceiving and feeling. And the way it exhales is by expressing. Now that doesn't mean you can even express yourself if you're sitting in a room alone and silent. So there are many, many ways we can express ourselves, but we have to inhale and exhale. We have to perceive, feel, and express. And if we don't, well, if you inhale and you don't exhale, you'll explode. And if you exhale and you never inhale, you'll turn blue, and you'll eventually, either way, die. So this is the expressive journey of healing, heart of all this. So just as, meditation, we don't meditate to become great breathers. We meditate to become clear vessels. And similarly, and I'll use writing, we don't write to become great writers, we write to become clear vessels. So some of the reasons to express: it makes life more real, it helps remove what's in the way, and it helps us live. And it helps us live. So I want to share two stories of two artists, in different kinds of artists, because it's drinking from what matters that is essential, and it's not about leaving or staying. So I want to share a story about someone who found their true voice and their authentic living by staying, committed to something over years, and someone who that journey of being authentic led him to change his life dramatically. So let's do the first. The first is about Albert Schweitzer. Now we all know Albert Schweitzer was this amazing humanitarian. He created that hospital in Africa. Well, Albert Schweitzer in his 30s was a tenured professor at a very prestigious Lutheran high school in Germany. And besides that, he happened to play the classical organ. So on weekends and spring break or whatever, he'd be playing, Bach on the organ in concert halls around Europe, sold out. And then in his mid-30s, he had this vision. He said, I think I'm supposed to start a hospital in Africa. Only one problem, he wasn't a doctor. So he went to his colleagues and his friends, and he respectfully said, I think I'm supposed to do that. What do you think? And he said, are you nuts? You're tenured. You're selling out halls on the weekend. Forget it. It must have been the shrimp you ate. Forget about it. And he listened respectfully, and he resigned, and he went to medical school and became Albert Schweitzer. So there's a very powerful story of following what is true, and that doesn't mean that teaching high school was a wrong turn. It was his apprenticeship, which brought him to the precipice of discovering what it was for in him. But again, it's not about leaving. It's not about, to be true then I got to change everything and go to another continent. It's about following what's true, and following what's true can help us also deepen where we are. So the story in that regard of Lorenzo Ghiberti, who was one of the early Renaissance masters. So as the Renaissance was beginning, he lived in the 1400s. Some of you may have seen or have heard of the baptistry outside the great cathedral, the Duomo in Florence. Baptistry is like a fancy name for a shed. It's like a shed for the church, But beautiful, and they were ornate, and so he was commissioned as a young man. There were two sides that had these enormous doors, arched. They each one weighed like 6 tons. So the west doors, as a young man, he was commissioned to put 10 panels on them out of the New Testament, which he worked on. It took him 21 years. And these are like, they're in bronze and they're in relief. And right around the middle of that, so now he was in his 40s, he was about early 40s, and he got commissioned to do the other doors. And these are the more famous doors, the east doors, where he did scenes out of the Old Testament, and these took him 27 years. And these look like in relief, like human figures and cattle and landscape. Looks like they were dipped in gold and just attached to the door. They're known as the gates of paradise because when they were finished, Michelangelo was one of the first to see them, and he gasped and said, "The gates of paradise." During this time, the Renaissance was burgeoning, the Medici Circle was happening, and they all went to someone and said, "Hey, things are happening, come on. Forget about the doors. Man, this is like, that's never happened before." He said, "I'm all right. I'm good, thanks. Let me know how it turns out, but I think I'm supposed to be here." And he spent much of his life on those doors. Any of you who have been to San Francisco, Grace Cathedral in San Francisco has the exact replica of those doors. So you can see them even in this country. So again, there's a story of one, Albert Schweitzer, being true led him to say, "Oh, this has all been for this. I'm not a doctor, I guess I need to become one." Lorenzo Ghiberti said, "Hey, oh, okay, but I think I just need to deepen where I am." Now, how do you know the difference? Well, that's an inside job. I can't tell you that. You have to live with that and feel that yourself. So let me add a couple of other voices here in our conversation. So some quotes. One is from Rilke, the great Austrian poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, and he said, when all I wanted was to sing, I was accorded the honor of living." When all I wanted was to sing, I was accorded the honor of living. And again, I didn't talk to Rilke, I don't know what he meant, but that's what it said to me. And it might say something different to you. That living is singing. That no matter, the life of expression returns us to this fact that the art of living is singing. And we can find so many ways to live that authentically, wherever it might lead us. Second quote is from John Ruskin, who in the 1700s was an essayist and watercolorist. This beautiful insight. He said, "The highest reward for a person's toil is not what they get for it, but what they become by it." The highest reward for a person's toil is not what they get for it, but what they become by it. And the final quote, we go back a little further into ancient Chinese. Lu Yen was an early Chinese philosopher, and he said, before practicing the art of immortality, first practice the art of humanity. Before practicing the art of immortality, first practice the art of humanity. And again, it's returning to this sense that by being human, by living through our humanness, spirit shows itself. We have all these gifts, so we can transcend, we can stay up here in this amazing thing we call the mind. But that's not the same as living it. Any of you here of the Buddhist university in Boulder, Naropa? Naropa, yeah. And I've been blessed to speak there a few times, and I was always interested, as I am, well, why is it called Naropa? So I found an old professor, he's probably my age, and but at that time, and I said, "Do you know why?" He said, "Oh yeah," and he told me this story. So in the 1100s in India, Naropa was a world-renowned world religion scholar, like some of you have heard of Houston Smith, was in our age, just an amazing scholar of all different traditions. Well, Naropa was like that in the 11th century at a big university, I forget which city in India. And the story is that one day he was walking along the streets in the city, and an old woman with a cane was going the other way. And they got up to each other, and she stopped and said, "Aren't you Naropa?" And he puffed up. He said, "Oh, yes, I am." He's getting ready to give an autograph. And she stopped and said, "Do you know the heart of all those traditions?" And he was caught off guard. He said, "Of course I do." And she went, And they walked away about 20 feet, and he knew he had lied. And he ran back and kneeled before her and said, "Be my teacher."
He said what?
"Be my teacher. Be my teacher." And ever since, Naropa has been a symbol of embodied wisdom. not conceptual. I love that story. I love that story. So let's move, and there are many, you know, again, what I share are examples, not instruction, so there are many, you know, purposes to art, but here are just a few that I keep returning to. So for the first one, let me read this poem, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. This is also in The Way Under the Way. Page 214, called Thinking Like a Butterfly. Today, I was told I was good. I felt relieved. Tuesday, I was ignored. Wednesday, I was snapped at. Now I began to doubt myself. On Thursday, I was rejected. Now I was afraid. On Saturday, I was thanked for being me. My soul relaxed. On Sunday, I was left alone till the part of me that can't be influenced grew tired of submitting and resisting. Monday, I was told I was good. By Tuesday, I got off the wheel. Now, did I really get off the wheel? Of course not, because I'm human. So why do I end the poem there? And this is the first purpose of art, is to marry what is with what can be. I need to end it there because I need something to aspire to. If we only report what is, we risk falling into pessimism and cynicism and nihilism. And if all we do is talk about what can be, then we're barely tethered here. Then we're floating away at the ideal. It's wonderful. Yes. And the challenge of being a spirit in body and time on earth is no. Each of us is challenged to braid the two. So we don't float away and we're not ground down. And no one knows how to do this, which is why we need each other. That's the first, I think, focus or purpose. I think the second is to bear witness to what is. And my example of this is the great Pablo Neruda. Some of you have heard of Pablo Neruda, Chilean poet, won the Nobel Prize in 71, died in 73. Remarkable man, remarkable man. He was blessed to have a mentor. He was a diplomat for the country of Chile because the mentor, like their Secretary of State, knew how gifted and talented he was. And he placed him in different places around the world as kind of to let him be educated and exposed. He was in Spain connecting with Garcia Lorca and Anthony Machado, all these Spanish poets right around the Spanish Civil War. And he saw a lot of just horrible things. Has a line in a poem that goes, "The blood of the children on the sidewalk is like the blood of children on a sidewalk." So there's a whole instruction in those two lines. Metaphor is wonderful when we try to glimpse what's unseeable. But if we're trying to bear witness to what is, that gets in the way. It's like, no, the blood of children on the sidewalk is like blood of children on a sidewalk. Don't look away. You don't need to make another. So these are the two, the second and third. One is to bear witness to what is, but the other is how to try to say what's unsayable. The wonderful thing about being a poet is the only thing worth writing about are the things that can't be said. You know, when I was young, this happened to every young writer, I'd see something and I'd try to say it. And then well, that's not it. And I'd try to say it again. Well, that's not it. And I'd do this 5, 6, 7 times. I go, I can see it, why can't I say it? I'd be so frustrated. The only difference is now in my 70s, I do the same thing, and then I say, thank you, you gave me 7 poems. Because we can't say it. But the engagement with life Both what is and all that we can't see is what brings us alive, and that's worth it all. That's worth it all. And the fourth, one of the values of art, purposes, is to mirror our patterns. Just like in the first quote I said, George Bernard Shaw said, you use a mirror to see your face, but you use art to see your soul. To mirror our patterns. There's a great story about this. Any of you, it was told by Mose Allison, who was a blues player. And he was out in the Southwest, and he witnessed where a white educator was researching the Hopi Indians and about music. And he asked this Hopi elder, well, gee, you guys live in the desert. How come you have so many songs about water? And he said, well, we write about and we sing about the one thing we don't have. And then he looked at the white educator and said, how come you have so many songs about love? So the purpose of art is to marry what is with what can be, to bear witness to what is, while also trying to glimpse what we can't see but is so powerful around us, and to mirror our patterns. Again, to go back, these are all valuable practices in the art of living and introspection. So another time I invite you to take home a journal question or a conversation with a friend or a loved one. Okay, name one way that you need to marry what is with what can be. Name one way you need to bear witness to what is. Can you name one way that you need to try to glimpse or speak to what's unseeable or unsayable? And if you had to kind of look at your life right now, how would you mirror your own patterns? So let me move to the foundational stories, and then share a story and a poem, and then we'll open up for a conversation. So myths, and it's so interesting in our society, the word, take the word mystery, right? Go into a bookstore and you go to the mystery section. It's about how were lives taken and how can we discover who took the life or what took the life, and how can we solve that mystery? That's not what mystery means. The mystery of life is the sum total of the one unitive truth of all life that we are a part of, and how do we relate to that, which all the spiritual traditions have different avenues and practices about that. But we focus on who took it? Who murdered our energy? How do we get back to that energy? So myths originally helped us face and remember what are the quandaries of living and what are the different ways we might meet those quandaries. And I think early on they were all very specific, but through the ages the details, kind of wore off like rocks that fragment over time. And so we all have personal mythologies. Like everyone here, I'm sure you have 1, 2, or 3 foundational stories that help remind you who you are. They might be positive stories, they might be difficult stories, negative stories, but they help remind you who you are. They could have happened when you were young, they could have happened yesterday. We don't usually track them, but I would invite you to track one. I'll give you a personal example in a minute. One foundational story that helps remind you of who you are. So this is one for me, which is about my grandmother on my father's side, who was more of a mother to me than my mother. And it's just remarkable how I had this moment when I was 8 or 9. She lived in Brooklyn. She was a Russian Jewish immigrant. And I was rummaging around her basement in Brooklyn, and this is what happened. On the way to Coney Island, I was 8 or 9 rummaging through her basement, through my dead grandfather's books, when she appeared at the foot of the old see-through stairs, nostalgic and moved that I was searching through his things. There were no windows, and the only light came flooding down the length of stairs over her massive shoulders, giving a sheen to her matted gray hair. When I turned, she seemed an immigrant deity. I ran to her with this relic, so worn that the cover was indented with a palm print. The edges crumbled like petrified wood. The book seemed so mysterious. The letters weren't in English, just strange, beautiful configurations. She almost cried and sat on the bottom step. I snuggled between her legs against her apron. She gathered me in and she said, "This was your grandfather's prayer book. He brought it from Russia." I remember running my little hands over it. She turned me by the shoulders, the light flooding my face, and she whispered more firmly than I had ever heard anyone whisper, "You are why we came to this country." She took me by the chin. She said, "You are why I live." She put the relic in my small hand and slid my palm into my grandfather's touch. She stood on the bottom step blocking the light and said, "I love you like life itself." She reached down and sandwiched my little fingers and said, "These are the oldest things you own." And as she waddled up the stairs, the light wavered on and off her face. Without turning, she went back to her kitchen. I stood, and the light settled in the impression of Nehemiah's grip, a man I never knew, and I didn't want to leave this dingy threshold. I was afraid to climb back into the light. I stood before those stairs, a grimy little innocent, and I felt like an orphan who'd been told I was a prince to a kingdom that perished before I was born. I leafed through the strange letters, and I put the book behind a secret shelf because I was afraid it wouldn't survive in the world. And I walked the lighted stairs taller than I had descended. I entered her kitchen older, yet still a child, and climbed her lap like a throne. Thank you. But what Grandma had done for me, she was the first one who talked to me soul to soul. Even though I was 8, didn't quite grasp all she was saying. She was telling me, you're going to live your life, but you're enough as you are. You don't have to do anything. And I felt that authenticity from her, which I hadn't felt from anyone else in my life. So that, I return to that story when I get confused or can't quite remember what I'm doing or why. So we have these foundational stories, and we need to share them. The great poet of the last century, American poet Muriel Rukeyser said, say it, the universe is not made up of atoms, but stories. Stories are the building blocks. So let me close this opening part with a small poem, and then we'll have a conversation, whatever you'd like to talk about or ask about. This is a poem called Inside Everything. It's short, and I'll read it twice. Keep trying to hide, and in time you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true. Inside everything, keep trying to hide, and in time you become a wall. Keep trying to love, and in time you become love. Our journey on earth is to stop hiding so we can become love. Everything else is a seduction and a distraction. Courage is staying true. Okay, let's all take a deep breath. And yeah, Adam will kindly bring the mic around. And really, anything that you'd like to ask about, I'm happy to speak to. I have no answers. Ask all the questions I can answer.
Hello, Mark.
I'll hold it close to your,
Okay,
if you hold it close to your mouth, you'll be able to hear.
okay. Is this good?
Go ahead.
I did.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So do you really forget what you're doing? Do you, after all the writing you have done and all the, what seems to me to be excellent practice at becoming who you are, do you ever truly forget? Because I forget.
Uh-huh. Well, I would say, so the question is, do I ever really forget? Like, I think that the human journey, you know, wisdom is a support, not a shortcut in life. So it doesn't matter how much I've read or written, you know, I can go home after this and I'll trip taking the garbage out and I'll have to relearn it all over again. And isn't that wonderful? What else would we do? What else would we do? So I think that the challenge for each of us is, here's a good metaphor for this. So the ocean, it's all one water, remember, but we see the top and we call them waves. And the top is always disturbed because of wind and weather. Well, the top 6 inches, foot and a half, that's our psychology. That's the part of us that meets the world. It's always being churned up, messed around, but it's all one water.
So that's where you lose yourself.
Yeah.
In the turbulence.
In the turbulence, which is being human, being alive. But that's why we all need each other and to have a spiritual practice, because if I drop down, then I'm in the below those, that top, disturbed top is the ocean of being, spirit. And if
really down there, then you lose your doubt and you're not as...
I'm grounded, I'm grounded. It doesn't eliminate what I'm doing out in the world, but I'm grounded and not, yeah.
Because you're excellent.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Other thing, yeah, over here.
What is the title of the book that you were reading from?
Oh, The Way Under the Way.
And could you explain the title, please?
Yeah, well, I think it kind of speaks to what we were just talking about. The way under the way. That there, and the subtitle is The Place of True Meeting. That below the agitation and turbulence that comes from everyday living is the way under the way. It doesn't exempt us from living, but it gives us context and perspective. You know, like the great redwood trees out in California. Now, even with all the drastic weather, rarely, I mean, I don't know that a redwood has ever been uprooted. Be damaged and limbs will come down and parts of it'll, but that's because their roots are deep and their trunks are wide. That's the way under the way. And that's why we each need our own spiritual practice and our relationships so we can deepen our roots and widen our trunks. Thank you. Other questions or things you want to share or ask about? Oh, over here.
Everybody in this room wants to hear what you have to say. Now, what happens when you try and tell your truth and nobody wants to hear it?
Yeah, what happens when you feel the need to tell your truth and nobody wants to hear it? Well, I think there's two things. I think that's actually, we often merge these and we think it's one process. I bring my truth to you and you reject me or you don't hear me and I feel hurt and then I feel worthless. But there's actually two-part process. You know, one is expressing ourselves regardless if we're received. The second is being received. So it can hurt if you don't receive me. But you know, a flower doesn't wait for an audience to bloom in the forest. And we often merge those things when we need to say, yeah, this is who I am, this is what I have to say. I'd really like, you know, we have the axis between solitude and community. We need both. We need both. And the reward of expressing our truth is in our own, even if we're alone in our room, is that we affirm our person and we restore our connection to everything that's not us. And then I bring it to you and you go, well, what the hell are you talking about? Well, that hurts, but that's relational. And I need to well, I know this was good for me. I got to work on this. This hurts. Why can't you receive me? Can't you listen to me? There's a whole journey of relationship, but it doesn't dismiss your personal truth. So I think, you know, that we need, you know, D.H. Lawrence, who wrote a poem called Self-Protection. And the essence of the question of the poem was, what's the best self-protection, hiding who you are or being who you are? I think it's being who you are. And we can't let that go, otherwise we'll vanish. Thank you. Yep. Say what I just said again. What did I say? So that we can't let go of being who for reject because we'll vanish. So it's important to speak our truth, even if we're alone in a room. And your foundation. And deal from there with the relational thing. Why can't you see me? Why can't you hear me? What are you afraid of? Why are you being dismissive? All of those things, but not to hide, which takes courage and help. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for coming to Kalamazoo. In this book, Things That Join the Sea and the Sky, in the very opening, you have an incredible page, the what and the how, about your experiencing a jazz concert. And I'm sitting here with a friend of mine. We're classical musicians, and I'd like to hear, I'm just curious about your relationship with how you experience music, and if you tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. So, I mean, this is also, I think, very interesting that, of course, through the years I've learned from other writers, but I've actually learned from other art forms more. And so I've learned a lot from music and painting. And I think that music opens up spaces where we can feel that mystery that I was talking about, the connection to everything. And so I often write to music, just for where the spaces it opens. And my relationship to jazz is, especially with my teaching over the years, what I love, and you know, there obviously, you know, a jazz musician or any musician, right? You learn your skill, the chords, the keyboard, through such devotion and discipline so that you can improvise. Well, that's a lot of what it's been like to be a poet, is to, when I was young, like all artists, we were taught, be on the look for good material. Well, after I almost died from cancer, everything's good material. I don't have to be on the look for it, I just have to open my heart. If I'm not present, then it doesn't seem good. But if I'm present, a fly on the window can be a teacher. So the jazz of being with, forget looking for good material, and in that way, being an artist turned into being an inner explorer. And with my teaching, like I have, pages and pages of notes, but they're more like a set list. So when we're together in real time, then something you raise, and then my feeling to speak to it, I go, oh, I think I need that story. Oh, or that metaphor. Or maybe this poem now, and then someone else says something, oh. And so teaching has become very much like spiritual jazz. Thank you. Other questions, feeling? Oh, there's someone in the back.
This is great. Thank you so much, Mark. One of the things I think you are a real master of is being present.
Oh, thank you.
Being present is something that I absolutely am not sure I can ever master. What are sort of like the baby steps? How did you get to that point of being where you started to be in this moment and not the next and the next and the next?
Well, thank you. So I think, and it's a practice, and like anything else we're saying, am I 100% of the time? No, because I'm human. I'm committed to being wholehearted, but being human, sometimes I'm half-hearted because I'm anxious or in pain or forgot to pay the phone bill but then my devotion is to return to being wholehearted. So I think some of the being present, whenever I'm confused or troubled or have something to struggle with, I try to stop and give my full attention to the nearest piece of life until it becomes my teacher. Whatever it is, just stop. And I think that it's led me to what a practice I try to do is to move at the pace of what is real. So what does that mean? Well, for me that means, can my heart and mind and body move at the same pace? I've noticed when I do, I can't do that forever, I'm moving at the pace is what is real, and then I trip on the curb. Blah! So much for that. But again, I can return. But when I do move at the pace of what is real, I've discovered or noticed that's when moments seem to glow. That's when I look at you and go, oh, it's you. That's when I really hear you or myself. So that's a practice of presence. And I think a lot of it, especially in our age, is slowing down till I can receive in a heartfelt way what's before me and what's in me. Yeah, and just also being as honest as we can be. I'm really, people ask, you're introverted, extrovert. I'm really an introvert, but a long time ago, I just decided to be an introvert everywhere. Thank you. Any other? Well, Kyle.
Hi, Mark.
Hey, Kyle.
I wanted to ask you, it has to do with the creative process, and So you talk about being able to receive, being able to be active creatively, and which comes first? I mean, sometimes you can't just wait for things, right? Or maybe you do. Maybe you have to wait. So there's some kind of
Yeah. So
interplay.
yeah. Thank you. And I think they're inextricably linked together. And so to bring that back to, so okay, let's just talk about, so I have lots of ideas or things that come, right? That, or like, here's a vision for a book. But I've learned a long time ago, like, not one of the books I've written is the book I started. Not one. No. And I think the question you're asking is at the heart is the hardest thing to teach young writers. Because you have a vision, and then you aim for it, and then it goes somewhere else and you think you failed. Well, no, it's when you give your all and are engaged, and then it's like, you know, the muse or whatever says, oh, now that I see you're serious, I'm going to show you what this is really about. Hang on. So I think that there is giving our attention, our full attention and immersion to what's before us, and being open to where that will lead beyond what we think it will be. So it's not just to be passive and wait for something to happen. So sometimes I can just be present and things, they're always alive, but I see them. But other times, this is the engagement of living. And I want to broaden this to an insight about our current age. So the insulation of social media, the insulation from the pandemic, and this not being able to have direct contact with life, there's like, this is like a corollary to Newton's law, there's an equal and opposite reaction to everything. Life doesn't present itself until you lean in. And then it leans in. And now we're engaged. And now, forget what we create, we're brought fully alive. So in our insulation, we're watching and we go, oh, there's nothing there. Well, we didn't lean in. And I think that that's a really a skill or a learning exercise that we have to relearn in our age. No, not just watching. This is what I would talk about as screen mentality. So we've been on screen so much that there's an insidious side effect, if you will, that I go out, I've been on the screens, I've been on TV, I've been on an iPad, I've been on my phone, then I go out to the groceries, and in the supermarket parking lot, a woman falls down, drops her groceries, skins her knee, and I think it's on a screen. And I go, oh, that's so sad. Click. No, that's real. There's nothing between me and that woman who fell. But the screen mentality is slipping in as a film between actual reality. And then we go, oh, life sucks. There's nothing here. We gotta be here and remember how to be here. And going back to our authenticity and what we're talking about today, all of the arts, formal and informal, help us be here, even if it's planting tomatoes. Thank you. And we have someone over here. Oh,
hi, Mark. I so appreciate what you're saying, especially the leaning in. And then, of course, as an artist myself, I think of the vulnerability. And wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, because being human is also being willing to be vulnerable. And that can be quite frightening for people, which might be why they stick to their screens, or they're less likely, at least they think, to get harmed.
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course we can be hurt, we can be rejected. But I think that, and this is just, I think, an age-old truth that is expressed in all the different traditions in different ways. It's like, if we're not vulnerable, the cost is greater. Because without vulnerability, there is no transformation. In the Tao, Lao Tzu has a chapter where he speaks about, he said, everything brittle breaks, be like water. Everything brittle breaks, be like water. So there's a risk to being vulnerable, but I think there's a greater risk to hardening. So, you know, hardening in life, hardening will get us through life, but softening will let us live life. And we have to balance, again, that's another balance point that has to be personalized. The word vulnerable comes from the Latin vulnus, and it means to carry a wound gracefully. I don't think that means stoically. Like if you think of physical wounds, they all need light and to be open, and they need light and warmth to heal. In fact, if wounds are not open, they will fester, and there's an actual medical process, debriding, I think, or it is, that needs where people, you know, physicians and nurses will have to cut the wound open because it won't heal unless it's. So how do we carry a wound gracefully, which is the heart of vulnerability? How do we be who we are, wounds, flaws, and all, trusting that the strength that comes from that and the wholeness that comes from that is greater than the risk of being hurt and rejected, which goes back to your question. So again, how do we do this? Well, we got to compare notes. Nobody really knows how to do it. That's why we're here. Anyone else? Yes, we have someone here and back there. Oh, hi.
Hi, I am a poet, and in the last few years have been working toward publishing in little things or larger things. So I was wondering if you would be willing to share a little of your own publishing journey. As your poet, some successes, maybe even some failures,
Sure.
which I find oddly comforting.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, thank you. So I think that there are, for any artist, and this goes back to speaking your truth and not being heard. So on the front end, in any art form, as a young artist, we're not heard, we're not seen. And the struggle is not to lose your own truth. You know, it's very easy to go, well, gee, none of this matters. What am I doing? Okay. And so how do we stay true to the work? And I, at an early age, actually, to go back a little bit, so, and this just involves, I'll go back to my mother, who I was always under the influence of her rejection. Her love was very conditional. So when I was a young poet, and right, sending out to magazines, and back then we didn't do email, I had to lick this, and they made you put in your own return stamped envelope, so when they rejected you, you even had to pay for the stamp. Yeah. Thank you very much. We don't really care for your work. Thanks for sending the stamp. But I realized after a while, forget about the publishing, I was replaying the acceptance and rejection with my mother every time I went to the mailbox. Whoa. So even though that was painful, that helped me drop it. And I started to feel like I knew very well, again, not, oh, I'm a great writer, but I was like an inner explorer. I knew the truth of where I was exploring. And so I treated sending things out and all of that like sowing seeds. You sow seeds in the garden, you don't know which one's going to come up. You just throw out a bunch of seeds and then you get back to work. And yeah, it comes in and you accept it, yay, and you're rejected. But But again, like the tops of those redwood trees, if you're committed and you're in your work and your foundation is strong, yeah, it'll hurt, it'll be this, but it's not going to uproot you. Because I have been blessed on both sides to have attention to my work later now. And as blessed as it is, neither has anything to do with the work. Stay with the work. So, I had several, interestingly, I had the book As Far as the Heart Can See, which is a book of teaching teaching stories and parables. So that was accepted by a publisher, about 15 years ago. And when we entered the publishing arrangement, the editor was so I had a story in there about a heron. It just startles a cyclist, and he in the middle of a race, he stops, he loses the race, but it transforms him. So the first thing the editors, in editing the book after they accepted to publish it, is, can you take the heron out? And there was no way to communicate because there was no language. And my job was not to educate her or remediate her. And I didn't have any guarantee that that book would be published, and I pulled the book. And I had that internal argument, like, you're pulling a book, are you nuts? Figure it out. No, this crosses the line, I can't do that. You don't know there's going to be another publisher? I can't do it. But staying true to that, just what we've been talking about, the engagement that brings you alive, and we're human, so yes, but we're casting seeds where you can't control, where someone will hear you. Someone will hear you and they will connect. And so I think the challenge is not to give, I have a chapter in Drinking from the River of Light, the difference between giving attention and getting attention. So we all have to get attention in an appropriate way. Like, I apply for a job, I've got to give you a resume. I need your attention so you can see whether you could want to hire me. But we have to watch as artists, if we slip over the line and spend too much time getting attention, it's giving attention that brings us alive. And if we spend too much time getting attention, we lose access to the source. And that's the most important thing. The rest will follow. So thank you. We had someone back here.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Thank you so much, as usual. 30 years I've been coming to hear you read and speak, and better for every time of it.
Oh, thank you.
I guess I'm wondering, for myself, maybe you could share, your writing helps people. It's like a balm.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just wondering, maybe you could share what it provides for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's how I learn how to be here. I learn. It's just that's why I meant in the beginning, we can learn in many, many different ways, and it's how do you find what way works for you? Again, it could be through gardening, it could be through stamp collecting. If we give our whole heart to it, it will open up. For me, it's always been through expressing, and I think of it as staying in conversation with life more than creating. And, over the years, writing has become listening and taking notes. And so what happens is when I speak from that space, when I listen from that space, I'm in the way of the way. And it grounds me. And then again, it doesn't exempt me from life, but then when I live life, I have roots. I am connected to everything around me. And so that's just keeps, it's a way that I feel authentic. Yeah, thank you. And yes, we have someone up here.
Thank you, Mark, for coming to Kalamazoo. I read your book several years ago. I don't even remember the title anymore, but it was a long time
That's
ago.
all right.
And I was in New Jersey at the time, and the very fact that you lived in Kalamazoo was motivation enough to return to Kalamazoo. But my question is, do you believe or do you practice silence? Because silence and creativity go together, I think.
Absolutely.
And so do you have any kind of practice of silence?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean by that writing has been, do I practice silence? That we have to have a relationship to silence. And that I mean about become listening and taking notes is to enter the silence. And this has to do, you know, it's because the silence, it's as if to me there is, and again, this is not just my idea, it's in all the traditions, that there's a universal ground of being out of which the things of this world grow. And so if we're only occupied with the things on the surface, we miss the whole fabric. Even with ourselves, even listening under the voices in our head. And so that requires slowing down and being still, and then seeing what we hear. And I think that it's amazing, like, you know, music comes out of the universal silence. You know, Keats in his, you know, famous Ode on Grecian Urn said, you know, heard melodies are sweet, but the unheard melodies are the sweetest. So, and it's just like I said about writing, the only thing worth writing are things that can't be said. But it's out of that fabric of being that everything is informed. And so how do we relate to that? And if we don't relate to that, then we're just like pinballs in a pinball machine. We're trying to avoid holes and we're bouncing off everything. And we're still going to bounce around, being human, but not if we have that ground of being, whatever you want to call it. A lot of us go into nature to retrieve that sense. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else as we yes. Wait, get.
We're divers, and at depth, you feel that there isn't a surface that's separate. The turbulence continues all the way down and down and down. We've been at rivers that are at 80, 90 feet, where there's flow, and you see things moving in the flow, and you can wrestle sand and see it get caught in the rivulets. It looks still, maybe, because there isn't an interface with the air.
Yeah.
But in terms of the talk of a ground of being, it's continuous and it's all dynamic.
Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. So as divers, Jeff is saying that, did you all hear him? Yeah, and it is when we're in that, it is continuous. It's hard to separate inner from outer. Yeah. Anyone else as we continue? We got a couple more, yeah. Back here and then up front again.
Hi. You speak a lot about your transformative period of cancer, and I wonder about how people can find that, maybe find a way into those hard lessons without having to go through cancer. Maybe.
Sure.
And
yeah. So thank you for that, because it's not just difficult things. So I think that everyone has the opportunity, or will have the chance, to be dropped into the depth of life. And it doesn't, it's not just life-threatening things. It could be beauty, surprise, wonder, being loved and seen by someone completely for the first time. So it can be many, many things. I talk about cancer because that's what opened me, but that's not the only, difficulty isn't the only path. I think that as human beings, we grow in two basic ways. We willfully shed, or we're broken open. And if you're not willing to be shed, don't worry, you'll be broken open. So, and usually it's a combination of both. But I think that this is why all the things we're talking about today, I think the ways that we willfully shed, that we move to that opening space is by being authentic, is by being engaged, is by listening, by leaning in and following whatever engagement brings you alive. I think these are the ways and how you practice that. Yeah, thank you. And we had up here.
You shared the wonderful story about your grandmother, and I'm very curious if she was your mother's mother or your father's mother.
She was my father's mother, and she, one of the very touching things for me is that, you know, she was an immigrant, as I said, who came at the turn of the 1900s from Russia to America, didn't know English, and you know, I've been blessed at this point to have my books translated in many languages, and you know, including Russian, and having the first Russian translation. I don't speak Russian, but knowing that 100 years ago she came here not speaking English, and then almost 100 years later her grandson has something translated back into Russian. Just, my God, yeah. Well, thank you. What a beautiful conversation. Let me move to sharing some things on the other end, on the way out of our time together. So let's see, where... Oh, yeah, so the book that I pulled that was published elsewhere is this one, As Far as the Heart Can See. I'm going to read you a passage from that on page 184. And it's kind of some of my journey in discovering, not just through cancer, but through just living this opening we're talking about. This is called The Invitation to Grow. When I was starting out, I wanted so badly to become a poet that I held it in view like some hill I needed to climb to see from. But getting to the top, something was missing, and so I had to climb the next hill. Finally, I realized I didn't need to climb to become a poet. I was a poet. The same thing happened with love. I wanted so badly to love and be loved, but climbing through relationships like hills, I realized again that I was loving and loved all along. Then I wanted to become wise. But after much travel and study, it was during my bedridden days with cancer that I realized I was already wise. I just didn't know the language of my wisdom. Now I understand that all these incarnations come alive in us when we dare to live the days. We carry the love and wisdom like seeds, and the days sprout us. Another lesson is more recent. It comes from a conversation I had with actually, this was written a while ago, so it's not so recent, but a conversation I had with a very wise woman who was a mentor to me, and she was the Jungian analyst Helen Luke. Some of you know about Helen Luke, yeah. She lived in this area, and she was an amazing Jungian analyst. And I knew Helen during the last 2 years of her life, and during what turned out to be our last conversation, she said to me, and she was short and British and looked over her glasses, very tender in the center, but she pointed her finger a lot, and just a marvelous woman. And she said, "Yours is to live it, not to reveal it." Well, this troubled me, for I've spent my life becoming a writer, thinking that my job has been just that, to reveal what is essential and hidden. But in the time since Helen died, I've come to understand her last instruction as an invitation to shed any grand purpose. She wasn't telling me to stop writing, but to stop striving to be important. She was inviting me to stop recording the poetry of life and to enter the poetry of life. And I've come to see that this applies to all of us. If we devote ourselves to the life at hand, the rest will follow. For life, it seems, reveals itself through those willing to live. That's that leaning in. Anything else, no matter how beautiful, is just advertising. This took me many years to learn and accept. Having begun innocently enough, there arose separations, and I know now that health resides in restoring direct experience. So having struggled to do what has never been done, I have discovered that living is the original art. Living is the original art. And again, no one quite knows how to do that. So let me share a couple of things I've learned along the way. And you can apply them as you will, as they speak to you. But, for me, poetry is not rhyme and meter and stanzas on a page. Poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul. Again, you don't have to write it down. Poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul. And I feel like all my books it's my publishers who separate it into nonfiction and poetry and this and that. To me, it's all poetry. And so this leans into, again, I feel like it's more about discovering than inventing, and relating more than manipulating. I certainly, again, like I have ideas, I have visions or blueprints, but I've learned that they are kindling for what my engagement will help create than something that I'm creating out of nothing. So here's another small piece about this. This is very interesting. This is on page that I discovered. This is on page 243 of The Endless Practice. So this was another thing. This book, The Endless Practice, with the publisher I had at the time, and the people who were supporting my work, And so we got to just about to publish it, and the publisher and the editor called me up and said, would you think about changing the title? Because it's The Endless Practice, it's kind of depressing. And I said, well, you don't get tired of breathing, do you? So I said, no. But we had a very good conversation, after which they said, gee, okay, I think we get it. What we talked about, could you add that in the beginning of the book? Which I did. So that was a good conversation of listening. But in here, this is about the practice before the practice. There is always a practice before the practice. And this speaks to the silence. So sitting before the incomprehensible long enough to feel and sometimes understand the mystery that each instrument and tool and craft helps us bring into being. In Japan, before an apprentice can clay up his hands and work the wheel, he must watch the master potter for years. In Hawaii, before a young man can ever touch a boat, he sit on the cliff of his ancestors and simply watch the sea. In Africa, before the children are allowed to drum, they must rub the length of skin stretched over wood and dream of the animal whose heart will guide their hands. In Vienna, the prodigy must visit the piano maker before ever fingering a scale to see how the keys are carved and put into place. And in Switzerland, legend has it that before the master watchmaker can couple his tiny gears, he must sit long enough to understand the passage of time. Starting this way enables a love of the process that is life-giving. The legendary cellist Pablo Casals was asked at 92 why he still practiced 4 hours a day. He smiled and replied, "Because I believe I'm making progress." It is this sort of deep progress that can save us. So there's always a practice before the practice. And that also involves something else I want to bring up, and that is the effort to look again. To look more than once, to listen more than once, to ask more than once, to feel more than once. So and it's interesting that the word respect means to look again. Respect. Inspect means look in. Respect means look again. So when you look again, when you give attention like we're talking about, when you're engaged, you are respecting yourself. So two artist examples of looking again. So one is Matisse. So Matisse, who was very, very admired the work of Delacroix, a generation before him. But he went, so Delacroix had painted in Morocco. Matisse took some canvases and he trained, and he went across from France down into Morocco, stayed at this villa, and about 6 months, and he painted 3 big paintings. And he brought them back to France, and the painting Acanthus, which you can Google, a year later, he's looking at the picture of Acanthus. He said, you know, I don't know if I got this right. So he takes the painting, takes the train, gets on the boat, goes all the way back to the villa, holds it up to where he painted. He said, I got it right. So I don't see that as being like obsessive or perfectionist. The effort to look again once. And for what that journey did for him more than the painting. The second story about this is E. E. Cummings. E. E. Cummings, the wonderful poet who lived in a village in New York City, wife Marion, they had a wonderful, so this story is, he had a study in the basement and they'd have breakfast together, he'd go down and work and they'd have lunch. So one day he goes down breakfast and lunchtime and she calls him up and he's got this huge smile on his face. He says, well, what? You look like you had a good morning. What? He said, oh, it was marvelous, marvelous. She said, what happened? He said, well, after breakfast, I was working on a poem and I took this comma out. And just before you called me, I put it back in. But it's the engagement. It's the effort to look again, to look more than once. This is also why we tell stories. Sometimes we tell stories because we're forgetful, especially as we get older. Most often we repeat stories because they bear more than, they have more to digest than one telling can reveal. To look again, to listen again, to tell the story again. And part of loving and being true to each other is listening again and again. Because I might be impatient, my God, you're telling this for the 6th time, but it might be the 7th time that holds the lesson for me. And I learned this when in my former marriage years ago, and my in-laws were farmers in upstate New York, and I was no longer married to my former wife, but I was out here when my father-in-law died in his 80s, and I went back to see Mary, his wife, who was also in her 80s, and when I had tea with her, and I'm in the farmhouse, and she started telling me the moment she found him in his overalls, he was going, which he was what he would have wanted, going to the barn. And then we talked a little more, and then she started telling me of that moment again, and again, and again. And I thought, oh, you know, maybe she's not lucid, blah, 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 blah. And then I thought, They were married 67 years. Now, Susan and I have been together almost 30. How can I imagine what that would feel like? And I realized she was rehearsing what life would be without him. And then I felt, tell it as many times as you need to tell it. The effort to look again, to listen again. So this is the effort. So we talked about leaning in. This is the effort to stay engaged, even through our own impatience. Where am I going? That I can't listen to this huge moment as many times as she needs to speak it. So a take-home question to either journal or be in conversation about is, what is one thing, relationship, what is one place that you are being called to look again? Go look. Go listen. See what you discover. See what you hear. See what you see. And then discuss it with a friend. And then discuss it with a friend. So, I think two things, and this goes to your question about how do we approach this without having to go through difficult stuff. Well, I think two practices are patience and holding nothing back. Patience and holding nothing back. Because despite the speed of our age, things that matter still take time. You know, this is talking about earlier, so years before when I was making the stamps and sending stuff out. So a journal that has published for 30 years is this wonderful journal in England, Sufi journal. But back then, I'd send this guy a letter. A month later, I'd get a letter back. That's how we corresponded. And then this thing, email, happened. And I said, all right, I'll get... And a half hour later, he wrote back to me. It like blew my mind. But now, if on the way here, I text you and you didn't text me in 30 seconds, what the hell? I'm offended. What, you didn't get back to me? What's wrong with you? The effort to look again, to listen. Things that matter take time. There's a great old Zen story in 2 sentences. Why is the road to freedom long? Asked the troubled apprentice, and the master replied, because it has to go through you. Now, when I first heard that years ago, I thought, ooh, ouch, that's a critical response. But over the years, I've come to understand that it's a geographical response. Because the journey within us is a continent, and it takes years. He wasn't being critical. He's saying, yeah, why is the road to freedom so long? Asked the troubled apprentice. And he said, well, it has to go through you. It has to go through you. Which brings up the Lakota saying, the longest journey you will make in your life is from your head to your heart. The longest journey you will make in your life is from your head to your heart. So patience. Our humanness is incredibly impatient, but our spirit is infinitely patient. That's that flow down below. It's infinitely patient. And the second thing is holding nothing back. Giving our all to whatever's before us. So this is a quote, Dag Hammarskjöld. Anybody remember Dag Hammarskjöld, some of you? Okay, he was the second Secretary General of the United Nations. Died in a plane crash. There's some controversy of whether that was an accident or not these days. But he had a remarkable journal of his own called Markings. You can still get it. It's like used, but you're not going to find it as a new book. Just incredible. And this is from his journal. I don't know who or what put the question, I don't know when it was put. I don't even remember answering, but at some moment I did answer yes to someone or something, and from that hour I was certain that existence is meaningful and that my life in self-surrender has a goal. I don't know who or what put the question. I don't know when it was put. I don't even remember answering. But at some moment I did answer yes to someone or something. And from that hour I was certain that existence is meaningful and my life in self-surrender has a goal. So how do you practice patience, and how do you practice holding nothing back? What does that look like for you? What does that look like for you? Your art of living? What does that look like for you and your art, whatever your art form is? What does patience and holding back look like for you if you're a musician, or if you're a sculptor, or if you're a painter, or if you're a gardener? So just a couple more things, and then I'll bring us to a close. So one thing, and this is a difference of two things I learned from my father. One not so great and one wonderful. So the not so great is, growing up, if I heard it 1,000 times, no matter what I would bring him, he would say, "Don't tell me how hard you work, show me what you accomplished. Don't tell me how hard you work, show me what you accomplished." And while that constant kind of pushing back, rejection, I learned certain skills that have been lifelong skills, I've actually come to believe the opposite. Don't show me what you accomplished, show me how hard you work. I want to see your humanity. And interestingly, this leads the thing he showed me, not by talking, but by watching him. He was a master woodworker. He built a 30-foot sailboat out of wood that I spent a lot of my youth on. All the furniture in our house. He taught pattern making at Brooklyn Tech High School for 30 years. And it was watching him work with wood that taught me the opposite of what he said. So he used to, after he had built the big boat, he had this practice or this hobby of building what are called half models. He would get blueprints actually from sailing ships from the 1800s, and then to scale he would build them, and so that you could mount them on a wall. That's why they were half models. But everything, the rigging, the sails, the little turnbuckles. And I remember being, 10, 11, sitting on our basement steps, which were see-through, and he didn't know I was watching, but I was watching him. And he had a tweezer, and he was so immersed in pulling and rigging and placing all this tiny stuff. And I realized in that moment, later, I didn't have words for it then, he was teaching me the secret life of detail, which led me to later understand it's about immersion, not excellence. He was so immersed that he was in the moment of everyone who ever built a boat. And being that immersed, the byproduct will probably be excellence. But I can approach excellence without being immersed. And that's like the gears of a wheel. So he taught me it's immersion is how we join with everything, by holding nothing back, by giving our all. And just as a flame will give off heat, right? Well, if you're immersed, that effort will give off excellence. You don't have to worry about it. So, inventory question. How is your practice of immersion going? Where can you deepen it? How can you practice it? So finally, what I'd like to share one more story about my grandmother, and then I'll close with a couple of poems. So the story about my grandmother, which again goes to the heart of the art of living, and I think the heart of all the arts. So my grandmother, who did live to be 93, and toward the end of her life, it was before there was assisted living, but she was in a wing of a hospital in Brooklyn where they were just putting people, it was basically assisted living before they named the concept. And I would go to see her as best I could. I was living in upstate New York, and it was a beautiful May day, actually, and I came down to see her, and she was in this one room. She'd been there for about 8 months, had one window. And I walked in, and I happened to see her before she saw me, and she was sitting on the edge of her bed, and she was 93, and she looked glum, you know. Then she saw me, you know, she cheered up, smiled, and I said, "Hey, Grandma," I said, "What's the matter?" And she always had this thick Russian accent her whole life. She said, "Oh, it's a gray day." Well, it was a beautiful day. So right away I thought, gee, is she lucid? Well, but then I looked around, and she had this one window, and it was caked with dirt. It was a gray day for her. I said, "Grandma, the window's dirty. I'll get it clean. It's a beautiful day. Let me take you out in the courtyard." And there's only someone almost 100 who had crossed an ocean to be here. She looked at the window, she looked at me, and she said, "Got a dirty eye, see a dirty world." Got a dirty eye, see a dirty world. And I count that as immigrant wisdom. And I can't tell you how many times that saved me through the years. Because there will be gray days. But before we put all of our energy into it, make sure the window is clean. Now, this goes back to what we've been talking about the whole time. The window of your eye, the window of your heart, the window of your ears. What are the practices, the relationships and experiences that clean your inner windows? That's what the practice of poetry does for me. It cleans my windows. And this is one of the other values and purposes of all art, to clean our windows, which is a never-ending task. You know, right? Window gets dirty, then you clean it. It's not because the dirt is evil. It's natural. And so too with us. Experience films our windows, but the difference is every time we clean an inner window, we get an inch of insight. An inch at a time. So, yeah, thank you for this wonderful time together, for your attention, your being so present. I think I'll just close with this one kind of prose poem. It's at the end of the Book of Soul. Let's see where. Oh, maybe hold it. I don't think it's in that book. I've waited 30 years to mix up which book it's in. Okay. So this is called The Love of Everything. After more than 70 years, I confess that even when struggling, even when lost, I have never stopped loving everything. And this has enabled me to inhabit life authentically. In the beginning, there were goals I was taught to work toward, and these longings for worth were honed in time into personal ambitions, which all fell away. For staying true to the love of everything as our teacher has turned out to be the most enduring ambition of all. This love has made me get up when I have fallen. It has given me the strength to enter the breaks in my heart where I have retrieved my gifts. And so I have very little to offer beyond the affirmation that unending love without preference will lead us to drink from the mystery without leaving the world. Unending love without intent will fill every contour of existence the way light fills every hole. So there is very little to teach, just that love awakens everything and care erases the walls we keep building between us. All right. You never have to worry about asking a poet to read something twice. Yeah. Okay. The love of everything. After more than 70 years, I confess that even when struggling, even when lost, I have never stopped loving everything. And this has enabled me to inhabit life authentically. In the beginning, there were goals I was taught to work toward, and these longings for worth were honed in time into personal ambitions, which all fell away. For staying true to the love of everything as our teacher has turned out to be the most enduring ambition of all. This love has made me get up when I have fallen and has given me the strength to enter the breaks in my heart where I have retrieved my gifts. And so I have very little to offer beyond the affirmation that unending love without preference will lead us to drink from the mystery without leaving the world. Unending love without intent will fill every contour of existence the way light fills every hole. So there is very little to teach, just that love awakens everything and care erases the walls we keep building between us. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure having you here.
Wow.
Really inspiring. Thank you for being here today, and we'll continue on with the festival. Please stop and say hello on your way out. If you have any questions for Mark or for anybody with the festival information, you can ask me. And thank you to Mark Nepo for this talk.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.